Good evening, viewers. We are live for another episode of COVIDCAST JA. This is not just any episode. This is episode 20. 20 weeks we have been together discussing the various issues facing our business as a result of the pandemic. Nevada, 20 weeks later.
Unbelievable.
So much to discuss.
Right. We're like a business married couple now.
I feel that way. I'm like, hi, honey.
Yes.
So on this episode 20, viewers, we will be talking about crossing the chasm, the road to economic recovery. If you have not received your SME memo, I know that you have, but just in case you've not yet subscribed, please subscribe to SME at PSOJ.org. We're looking forward to lively discussion tonight. So please share your comments with us on the live chat. This week, we're going to be joined by three guests, Mrs. Nicola Madden-Greig, Mr. Henry Mooney, and Mr. Keith Duncan. We'll introduce them properly later, but we have a packed episode today because we're going to be talking about some very important issues. And in fact, this week's SME memo is titled, "Why is micro and macroeconomic concepts important to SMEs?" Because, sometimes we're just looking at the pricing and we're looking at the product and we're looking at location, but we're not looking at the entire environment that we're operating business. Nevada,
Yes.
What we're talking about this week?
Absolutely. So just like last week where we talked about financial statements, and sometimes many of the SMEs, as we know, glaze over. What is that topic? You just want to run my business. Why are you hassling me with the numbers? Today, we're going to talk about the broader economic environment that a business exists in,
Yes.
and then figure out how can that broader economic environment relate to my business. The reason we're doing this, by the way, we're laying the foundation for a discussion around when we start to figure out how we're going to create economic recovery during and post-COVID. It's very critical that we keep our eye on the macroeconomic and microeconomic issues. So very important to get the memo this week because it assumes, again, you know nothing. That we start, again, every week we start the memos in a way that start from scratch. And we go through about what is macroeconomics, what is microeconomics, and how does business decision making is impacted by that.
Yeah,
so
this is actually particularly important because many of us, when we hear of these concepts, the first thing we say, this is high science. This has nothing at all to do with my business. But remember, your business does not exist in a vacuum. Your business exists in a particular environment. And we're also setting the stage today, too, for our online digital conference, which will be on August 14th from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Get on that list. Email us at sme@psoj.org. The private and public sector will confront the economic challenges of the pandemic. And this is some very important discussions. Guess what? You can't change anything. You can't impact if you're not at the table. This is an opportunity to have a seat at the table for a national conversation on the road to recovery. Nevada, this macro and microeconomic conversation, though, because I've gone through the memo, and let me tell you, the memo really does break it down very nicely. But initially, when I looked at it too, I thought, Lord, macro and microeconomic concepts, what a bore. Let's talk about that, though, and why is it so important that we're understanding these concepts?
Understood. We're going to try and do a little dance through it.
So lead us through it.
Yes, going to put up a slide to sort of lead the conversation. And it's the link between macroeconomic policies and small business. Okay, so the first thing to understand is what is macroeconomics? And the way to think about macroeconomics, that is about government policies and what the government does to create a certain economic environment in which business can exist. And basically, the government has three types of levers, three types of policies with which it can impact the economy. The first is what we call fiscal policy, FISCAL, fiscal policy. And that has to do with government spending, government budget, and then also how do you finance the government spending and the government budget. So whether it's through taxes or loans and so on, whether it's raising taxes or borrowing locally or borrowing from a multinational agency like the IDB or the World Bank, or from another international country. So that's one set of things, right? And that typically in Jamaica, that's managed by the Ministry of Finance, and that part of the area, the budgeting and how we fund the budget. The second variable on the macroeconomics policy is what we call the monetary policy, and that's governed by the Bank of Jamaica. So that's where we do things like we managing inflation. We figure out the interest rates, how much banks get charged, interest rates, and how much interest rates banks charge to businesses when they borrow. That's about the foreign exchange reserves. How much US dollars are we going to keep? So if we have any structural issues, we're able to lean on them. And then, of course, the exchange rate, right? The devaluation or revaluation of the dollar, that's all under the Bank of Jamaica, the monetary policy. The third line on the macroeconomics policy is what we call the industrial policy. So that's where you have, for example, a ministry of education, minister of tourism. No, not yet. The previous slide, right? Minister of tourism will go on to galvanize and potentially protect or create regulations for an industry so that it can grow. Macroeconomics now. So macro is the big picture. That government policy. Micro is when an industry or an individual takes a set of decisions based on the macro around resource allocation. So I am going to start a lamp manufacturing business. I'm going to build a hotel based on the macroeconomic conditions. And that's where we get things like the industry structure. Is it many players or one player and one or two big players and then a few other ones? That's where we study things like supply and demand, which of course, those of you who have studied economics, that's the intersection point that creates pricing and the amount of production. So how many of the lamps I'm going to actually make is very dependent on whatever it costs me to make the lamp and what I'm going to charge for the lamp. So those are the micro decisions. And the third piece is the business decision making. And business decision making has to do with the stability of the macro environment, because if you have a lot of juggle, like we like to say, it makes it very difficult to make business decisions. The risk appetite of the business. So how much risk am I willing to take, certainly vis-a-vis other options in terms of where I put my resources. And thirdly, the belief. Just a basic belief in my capability as a business to be able to deliver on the strategic plans. Now, the macro can create either positive or negative. I'll give you an example. In Jamaica, that period that we had for a long time with high interest rates, remember when the government was borrowing a lot, and literally you could just put your money down at the bank, lend your money to the government of Jamaica, and actually get 30%, 40% returns. What does that do? And how it create a structural set of issues in Jamaica? The banks didn't necessarily learn how to manage businesses, how to lend to businesses with risk. Why take a chance and lend to a business that has a lot of risk when you could just lend to the government of Jamaica and get 30%? Even as businesses do was become simply savers or traders. So we'd go buy stuff in China, go buy stuff in America, sell it here, or put the money in the bank and leave at 30%. So many industries like manufacturing and stuff that should have become part of the economy never became part of the economy because everyone we got discomforted with risk, and we also were able to get returns that were very good without doing much work.
And almost guaranteed returns.
Absolutely. Fast forward, and even after the interest rate environment has declined, we still don't have a lot of new businesses starting, growing businesses, and we still have the banks very risk averse with the sector. So some of this is we have to unlearn that mode of being and start to take more risk, especially during this time. Second slide, and why the links are critical.
Yes.
Okay. So now we're in the middle of the COVID pandemic, right? And we said this is a 2 to 3 year journey that we're going to be on. And this is going to require a calibrated and coordinated multi-sectoral response. So for example, we'll see many SMEs are facing temporary demand erosion, which means that business that they had in January, February has gone. Half of it's gone, 80% of it's gone at different levels. Some the whole of it's gone, right? In some of these situations, it's very difficult for the SME to pay rent. So they're going to try and negotiate with a landlord to try and reduce the rent because they don't have a demand in their business. Or in some situations, like in New York State, they did a situation where they gave statewide reprieve, so you were not able to be evicted. In Jamaica, the Prime Minister and the government decided not to get involved with renters and their rentees, which that's a national policy decision. In other countries, in other jurisdictions, they did. Now, but if you stop paying rent to the landlord has a mortgage.
Exactly.
So the landlord mortgage then becomes difficult if he's not getting his rent. Mm-hmm. So he's going to need bank moratoriums or bank forgiveness on the mortgage in order to be able to absorb the fact that you as a small business may not be paying any rent. In order for the bank to be able to give a reprieve on the mortgage, the central bank, the Bank of Jamaica, needs to provide liquidity support, because if the bank is not getting the regular monthly payment on the mortgage, they may need liquidity support in terms of being able to continue. So the Bank of Jamaica is also intimately connected to the issue. Then you have to have companies that do innovative financial structures, like a Cygnus, or Dimitri spoke to us a few weeks ago about when you have a situation where businesses that used to make specific payments every month, which is what a loan is, suddenly are starting and stopping and not quite going and can't make specific payments. You may have to rethink the financial structure that they're borrowing on and say, you don't have a standard payment each month, but you're going to pay based on how your business is doing. So you may pay higher over time because the bank or whoever is doing it takes more risk, but you absorb, you rethink the way the financial structure actually goes. Laying off people, redundancies, you're going to need government worker support program, which is a different piece of it. So the same SME, who's facing demand erosion, may end up laying off half of their workers, and those workers find it difficult to get jobs because the economy is not growing. You need some sort of compassionate payment like the CARE program. And of course, the multilaterals like the IDB and World Bank will have to somehow support this effort. Whether they're going to interface on rents, on SMEs directly, on care programs, whatever. But the key thing to recognize with this is, do you see how many different players have to be involved to successfully bridge the period of the 2 to 3 years? If each players don't integrate in the decision making, and everyone's sort of operating in silos, we could end up not recovering as quickly as we could because we didn't keep a coordinated eye on the various pieces that were relevant.
Okay. And for our viewers who have been listening so far and you're wondering, so where do I fall in this discussion? You are critical to this discussion, because when we're looking at things like macroeconomic policy, when we're looking at microeconomic issues and business decision making, this is all integrated in how your business will either succeed post-COVID and during COVID or not. So some of you are saying to yourself, so these macroeconomic conversations, where are these conversations had? And in fact, we hear of them every day. We hear of them at the opening of the budget, when the Minister of Finance is talking about tax policy. When we see the various things happening with the value of the dollar, that's part of monetary policy. When we hear of things like liquidity, remember last week we talked about liquidity, how much cash is in the market. And you're asking yourself, so, okay, when all of this is going on in an economy that is unpredictable, given the vagaries of COVID, what happens now? And that's exactly what we're discussing. The what happens now. Crossing that chasm, that road to economic recovery, and the various players that need to be a part of this conversation. The online conference will talk about it. Today, we're going to have Henry Mooney from the IDB giving us that multilateral perspective. So sometimes you see things like the IDB and you say, the IDB don't have nothing to do with me. In fact, all of these are part of our overall environment. And we're also going to have a very important discussion about tourism, because we've all been hearing about what has been and how dependent we are on tourism. So, Nevada, before we even get into that part of the discussion, can you just touch a little bit on some of the critical industries that we need to be keeping our eye on?
Yes. Well, certainly tourism is going to be an issue. As we know, it's a large portion of our economy. And not only tourism directly, but tourism also has indirect effects, right? Direct tourism, for example, is a guy who works at a hotel. But remember, that guy also takes a taxi to go to work. So the taxi man, his economics depends on that tourist guy having the hotel, or when the tourist person comes and buys something from a market or buys something from some kind of vendor, like food. That has to be part of the economics. That's crucial. Remittances are crucial. And the good news with remittances is that remittances this cycle, this year, are actually higher than last year, which means that Jamaicans abroad are actually continuing to spend and send money to Jamaicans here. And agriculture is going to be crucial as we see the rise in the price of the dollar and there being structural effects to the supply chain. Figuring out the ways to feed ourselves and trying to bring more of our agricultural industry home will also be crucial, because remember, many of the foreign things that we are buying are now going to be impacted with the declining dollar. It's going to get more expensive. For example, onion. Well, we buy a lot of onion abroad. We have to figure out a ways to start growing some onion here and not use the scarce foreign exchange. Remember, now we don't have the foreign exchange from tourism. So we're going to have to try and use less of that money and focus it domestically. We need to start grow onion here rather than import so much onion.
Okay, so the onion have to plant here. Nevada, thank you for this great introduction to our conversation. So Nevada is going to join us again towards the end of the program so that we can do that kind of wrap-up conversation. But right now, we are going to be joined by Henry Mooney. And Henry is actually joining us from Washington, D.C. Henry serves as the economics advisor with the Inter-American Development Bank, otherwise called the IDB. He previously worked with investment bank Morgan Stanley in London, as well as the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and the World Bank, and he worked in dozens of countries: Africa, Asia, Europe, Central Asia, Latin America, and in the Caribbean. Henry's roles have included serving as mission chief and team leader, and he has worked on IMF reform and lending programs, sovereign debt restructuring, and economic surveillance. So Henry is well learned in this matter of economics that we're discussing tonight. And I see Mags Blake saying, good evening, looking forward to great learning. And Mags, we're going to get some great learning here from Henry. So Henry, I know one of the first questions that our audience has is, what is the IDB? What is the IDB and what is it all about? We hear about it all the time. Can you tell us a little bit about the IDB?
Sure. So thanks very much for inviting me, Michelle and Nevada, and congratulations also for your 20th episode. And it's an honor to be here to participate. As I have to say, Nevada's introduction also was extremely telling and knowledge and complete, and I think gave a very good overview of how all the different sectors link together, and I think that's an important part of the conversation. So you asked about the IDB. So I work for the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB. So it's an institution that is based in Washington, D.C. It was started in 1959, and it's a multilateral or regional development bank whose mandate is basically to improve lives for member countries and the citizens of those countries, which are all of the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, 48 in total, including Jamaica. So the IDB is basically a partner to the government of Jamaica as well as other countries in the region, and we're here to support our countries in any way that we can, primarily through lending to help development in all sectors, everything from infrastructure to health to education to citizen security, public sector transformation. But we also provide knowledge products, technical assistance, capacity building, and other sorts of support.
Oh, So, when people hear about the IDB, in many instances, they think really it's just a multilateral that provides loans. And they're not quite sure, okay, what does all of that entail? So thank you for that introduction. And I think it would be useful too if you were to tell us about some of the projects that the IDB has contributed to through lending, capacity support in Jamaica and in the Caribbean pre-COVID, because I know the situation is a little different now, but tell us about some of the projects that you've been engaged in.
Sure. So, I mean, again, as I mentioned, the IDB has traditionally supported countries in a number of ways, not only through loans, as you mentioned, but also through technical assistance and help to develop institutions and capacity. Prior to the crisis, the IDB was and remains the largest multilateral lender to Jamaica and many other countries in the region. We had an active portfolio of roughly $1 billion US, including operations, so loans, across the entire spectrum. Some of the more notable ones were we put in place a contingent credit line, for example, recently to help support Jamaica in the event of a natural disaster. So if Jamaica was to be hit by some kind of a natural disaster, or weather event, or some other kind of a disaster, we would provide financial support that would disperse very quickly to help the government deal with the consequences of the crisis. We also have very large loans and operations partnering with the government in areas including transforming the public sector. So public sector development, not only building institutions, but also trying to help, for example, with digital transformation to try and make the government more efficient and more knowledge-based to help increase the efficiency of services and the breadth of services. Also, we have relatively large programs in the health area, which we're actually expanding now and working very hard with the government to help meet the needs of COVID as well. So really, it's across the entire spectrum. And again, we're very proud to be the largest partner to the government of Jamaica and the people of Jamaica, and it's been that way for some time.
Yeah. And Henry, I know you've been resident in Jamaica because you lived here for about 2 years. So when I talk Jamaican with you can understand. Because what I'm wondering is, now, at the beginning of this year, you would have seen a Jamaica that was moving at a good clip. We had seen growth that we had not seen in decades. And pretty much the country we were moving forward. And you mentioned that the IDB provides support for things like a major hurricane. But we've had an unprecedented event, a worldwide pandemic. So I wonder, from where you sit in the IDB, is this something that would have been that there was some kind of contingency in place for, or have you had to kind of go back to the drawing board with dealing with something that's affecting all of your member nations?
I mean, that's a really good question. And I mean, it is without any question that this COVID-19 crisis is something that very few people could have imagined in terms of how quickly it struck, how widely it's affected all countries across the globe, and how persistent it has been, right? I mean, we still have very few very good ideas about how long it'll be before we return to normal. So I agree with you that this is an unprecedented crisis, and we at the IDB, like all the countries around the world that we support, have had to try and adapt very quickly to the new reality. But going back to your first question about how Jamaica was doing before the crisis, I mean, I think one of the threads that shouldn't be lost was in all of this, as we all focus on the impacts of the crisis, is how extremely well Jamaica had done over the last 6 or 7 years. I mean, the conversation that was taking place about economics and Jamaica's future before this crisis was all focused on the incredible success that this government and previous governments had in terms of stabilizing the macroeconomic situation, taming inflation, reducing debt, improving the fiscal stance, building institutions, building credibility around the world. So Jamaica actually was in a tremendously good position before the crisis struck to sort of pivot to the next thing on the economic agenda. And Nevada mentioned this before, which was trying to focus on helping to develop the private sector, right? And now that the work of macro stabilization and debt reduction had really started in earnest. It was time. This was the time really. The story of 2020 should have been moving towards private sector development. Unfortunately, we are now facing this crisis, but I think it's important to remember that Jamaica actually went into the crisis in a much better position than it would have been years before, and actually in a very good position relative to many other countries around the world in terms of the fiscal flexibility that you had built by having done all of that hard work in fiscal restructuring and fiscal restitution. I mean, Jamaica went into the crisis with large cash buffers, which has allowed the government to adjust to this new normal in ways that are less harmful to the economy over the long run. So all that to say, we are adapting. All countries around the world are having to adapt and have to think about new ways of coming up with economic stimulus and support, which was also mentioned by Nevada, to try and address what is a very abnormal crisis. I mean, to put that in perspective, we've done a lot of research that we have put out looking at historically how this compares, certainly in the tourism sector, to historical crises. And, to put into perspective how unprecedented this is, during the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, we saw tourism flows to the Latin American region drop by about 4 to 5% year on year, right? So that was considered a huge shock in 2008 and 2009. This year, we are looking at the most plausible scenarios have between a 40 to a 70% drop in international tourism. So a magnitude of 10, right, relative to historical crises. So that just to underscore how unprecedented this crisis is and how difficult it is going to be to deal with, particularly for countries like Jamaica that are tourism dependent.
Yeah, and I'm glad you've mentioned to Henry what you've been seeing around the world, because I think one of the things that we have been wondering about is what kind of regional response are we seeing to the pandemic? How are you seeing our neighboring Caribbean countries, and very importantly in the Latin American region, what kind of responses are you seeing to pandemic? And we always want to know how do you see us measuring up to the responses that you're seeing?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing that I to say, and again, we've reflected this in a number of pieces of research that we've put out recently, is that Jamaica has actually been very responsible in terms of its response to the health dimensions of the crisis. So, as you know, and as your viewers will know, Jamaica is very quick to shut borders, to impose special restrictions, to impose quarantine requirements. So Jamaica has done as much as we think it probably could in terms of trying to stem the spread of the virus domestically, and that has actually borne fruit, as you see, compared to other countries in the world. The rates of transmission and infection in Jamaica are relatively low. So it's important to underscore how important that has been. Of course, the flip side of that is that one of Jamaica's main industries, tourism, which is responsible for anywhere between 10% directly and as much as 30% in total, including indirect impacts of economic activity and employment. So a huge sector and a huge contributor to Jamaica's economy. So that has been almost completely shut off, at least to international tourism, right? So the responsible policies on the health side have contributed to the deceleration of the economy. But as any government should tell you, its first responsibility is to its citizens. So in that respect, Jamaica gets very, very high marks in terms of its response and the results of that response.
Yeah, and in looking across the region and in Jamaica, just from the research that you've been doing, which sectors do you see seeming to survive and thrive during the pandemic, as compared to the sectors that we see struggling? We've talked about tourism. Nevada mentioned remittances earlier. What kind of thrive versus struggle are you seeing in the various sectors?
Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer, including because there in some respects there's not a lot of information available yet. Remember, the crisis really only started in March, right? And so we're only really a quarter away from that. So it feels like forever. We've been at home forever, or at least I have. But yes, it's relatively recent. There is information out there. I mean, what we know for sure is, as I mentioned, the tourism sector has been very badly affected, and that includes all of the sectors that depend on tourism. And unfortunately, there's very, very little that any government can do about that in these circumstances. So I think it goes back to the other point that we were making, that this is a time for policymakers to be thinking very hard about how they're intervening to support their citizens and their productive assets. And those productive assets are humans, right? Human capital, but as well enterprises, right? So in that context, I think really the important part of the discussion is trying to focus on what the government can do to help save enterprises that were thriving prior to the crisis. So we would expect them to start thriving again once the crisis dissipates and things get back to normal, certainly for tourism. Pardon me?
So the government needs to be putting them in a position that they will recover rather than during the time.
That's right. So I mean, to answer your question, I mean, I think very few sectors in Jamaica or in other parts of the world are actually thriving. Some are doing better than others, and those are the ones that remain important in terms of supporting local consumers, because international travel and international trade channels have been affected adversely. But again, it goes back to the policy story that this is a time for the government to be thinking not about traditional stimulus, which is trying to get people to spend more or to try and promote different sectors. Governments need to be thinking, including the government of Jamaica, thinking about how to protect your productive assets in this very abnormal period, right? Where they have been cut off from cash flows, cut off from business, and think about how important it's going to be to have those as viable operating going concerns once the crisis dissipates, because that's really how you're going to recover. So I think that's the conversation right now, and the government of Jamaica has been doing a very good job of trying to keep to encourage a dialogue with the private sector, including through the PSOJ and other channels, because I think that's the way that governments are going to be able to tailor their responses most directly to the needs of the private sector, and that's really what needs to happen now.
Yeah. We've seen some interesting developments in other Caribbean countries. So, for example, Barbados has implemented a policy where they've opened their borders to create almost like an island of work from home, to encourage persons to come into Barbados and work from home in Barbados. Very interesting. What kind of economic policies or measures have you seen put in place in the region, in other jurisdictions that you think are interesting at the very least, or some pretty good ideas?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned one that I think is getting a lot of press in the US and elsewhere. Obviously, who wouldn't want to go to a place like Jamaica or Barbados or Bahamas and spend their quarantine time sitting by the beach, right? So I think that that is an example of very innovative policy. I mean, with the caveat that, of course, we have to be very careful about who you're letting in. I think those same countries you mentioned are also seeing upticks now that the people are starting to come back, both citizens and people from abroad. So you have to be very careful, especially while this crisis is still very virulent. But I think policies like that are very innovative, and they capture the imagination of not only tourists, but new kinds of tourists that may have a different set of priorities now than they might have before the crisis. And I think certainly when the time is right and with the right precautions, Jamaica could benefit from policies like that. But I think the most important thing in terms of smart policies is to do as much as you can to prepare the ground, especially for tourism dependent economies, to prepare the ground for when you reopen. So to make sure that you have practices and policies in place for your tourism operators, whether it's hotels or the airports or transportation or tour guides and tour services, that they're able to make the case when things reopen to would-be travelers that Jamaica is a safe place to visit, that there are protocols in place that make it a safe place to visit. Because even though we know someday the borders will open and airports will open and planes will start flying, one thing that we're not sure about is what people's appetites are going to be to resume tourism, right? So I think it's going to be very important competitively for countries like Jamaica to position themselves as safe places that have, sanitary standards that are very high, and making sure also that you help to insulate your own population from potentially the disease coming in from abroad. So I think that for tourism, those are the kinds of things that the government is thinking about and should be thinking about.
Okay. In terms of, because you mentioned that one of the key things that government needs to have a handle on is ensuring that the private sector is they keep an eye on the private sector. So the businesses that were thriving before, that we ensure that there are policies in place to ensure those businesses will thrive post-COVID, and those that can thrive in COVID, that they thrive. The innovative policies to bring tourists to our shores, balanced with ensuring that our people remain safe. Those are some of the things that the government through policy will have to implement. Now, are there any other things that you see as useful for the government to implement as policy, and how does the IDB stand ready to support those policies or to support us in the move forward?
I mean, those are good questions. I think you mentioned many of the key things we've talked about and that the government needs to keep thinking about. In terms of the IDB's role, I mean, as I mentioned before, we are the biggest multilateral partner of the government of Jamaica and many other countries in the region. We stand ready to continue to support the government. In fact, we're in the process of discussing new loans, new mechanisms to help support the government, specifically with COVID response on the fiscal side. And on the exit side to recover afterwards. And we continue to discuss with the government any number of ways that we can provide support. And I think that that's one of the challenges in a case like this, that there's so much uncertainty that the government and the private sector need to be thinking very hard about how to navigate these uncertain waters in the coming months and perhaps coming years, right, until things normalize. And that is going to require a continuous conversation between operators, between other governments, between multilaterals and your government, to try and figure out how to best finance whatever it needs to finance in terms of support measures, and also to provide the kinds of support the private sector is telling the government it needs. So I think that in a nutshell, that's the broad spectrum anyway.
Okay. So Henry, one of the things we've talked about on this program is financial institutions lending in the uncertain environment. We've talked about things like a vaccine being, say, 2 years out, and the possibility of a second wave. So as our wrap-up question, what I'd love to hear from you is from where you sit in the IDB and the decisions that you have to be making as a multilateral, when you're looking at all of these variables and how uncertain these variables are, how has your decision-making process, well, the word for COVID is pivoted, how has your decision-making process pivoted in these uncertain times?
I mean, that's a really interesting question. As I mentioned before, everyone is adapting to this crisis and trying to figure out how best to do their job and satisfy their mandates in an increasingly uncertain environment. I think, the good news for an institution like us is that really we exist to try and step into situations where private markets may find the circumstances too risky to provide financing, right? And that's both our sovereign side and also IDB Invest, which is our private lender, right, within the IDB umbrella. So this kind of crisis actually fits our mandate very well, right? When countries are doing extremely well, they have little need of a multilateral development lender. They access private markets primarily, right? There's abundant sources of financing. But we are here to help governments in tough times, as well as help the private sectors that they serve. So we've been pivoting in as much as we're trying to get more financing in the hands of our clients, as opposed to the private sector that is actually pulling back. For us, this is really the kind of environment that we were built for.
Okay. So thank you very much, Henry Mooney. I was just going to say thank you very much, IDB, who is Economics Advisor at the IDB. And I like how Henry actually wrapped up for us. This is the kind of environment that multilaterals such as the IDB really step in on certain times where the private sector funding is contracting because of the uncertainty. The importance of multilaterals becomes even greater. Henry, thank you so much for joining us this evening on COVIDCAST, and thank you for your contribution and allowing us to get a better understanding of how the IDB operates and how it would operate in this uncertain time. So thanks a lot, Henry, and please stay safe. Henry joined us from Washington, D.C., the economics advisor from the IDB, and we are now going to be joined by our very own Mrs. Nicola Madden-Greig, a very familiar face. Nicola is the Group Director of Marketing and Sales of Courtly Hospitality Group. She's Vice President of the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association and immediate past President of the Jamaica Hotel and Tourism Association. She has over 20 years experience in the tourism industry and serves on multiple boards within the industry, including the Jamaica Tourist Board. Welcome, Nicola.
Thanks for having me, Rochelle, and nobody is off camera now, but the two of you have started out a great conversation.
We are so pleased that you could join us today because we know you have quite a bit to contribute to this conversation about tourism, and our viewers are hearing in the press. Some of them are, in fact, members of the tourist industry, and we know the membership in the tourist industry is direct and indirect, and all of us are affected. Tourism contributes how much to our GDP, direct and indirect? About 30%.
Yes, it ranges between 10 to 30% with both direct and indirect.
Yes. So, Nicola, we have to start though, because of what we're going through. Because, sometimes when we're going through hard times, we forget that we were actually going through some rather lush times.
That's right.
So I want to kind of go back to the beginning of 2020 when we were looking at the outlook for tourism for this year. What kind of outlook were we seeing?
Well, before we even go there, 2019, for example, was a really strong year for us. I mean, we welcomed over 4.2 million visitors. We were looking at over 3.6 billion in foreign exchange earnings. We had well over 120,000 employees directly and a total of about 350,000 employees direct and indirect. And at that time, we had almost 34,000 licensed accommodations and rooms. So tourism was doing extremely well. Winter 2020, we were looking for another bumper year. We had some increase in our room stock. The demand for Jamaica was great. We were really feeling good about everything. And we were positioning Jamaica to continue to grow. We were looking at a 5% increase in overall stopover arrivals. So 2020 was looking like it was going to be a fantastic year. And a matter of fact, January and February really didn't start out too bad. We saw a little softening at that time, and we were concerned. But generally speaking, we were looking for a strong 2020.
And then March 2020 happens.
And then March 2020 happened. So, I mean, it's been a very difficult time, as I would say. I remember January when I was at CHT Marketplace in the Bahamas, we were looking at the outlook, as I said. CHT Marketplace is our largest travel industry trade show. It happens every year where all of our Caribbean tourism entities meet with our international travel partners. And we had a fantastic show. I mean, everybody was upbeat. And we had a board meeting at Little Powwow, and I remember us talking, and I was talking to the president and saying to her, I hope we're not talking about this potential COVID thing come June, when we have our AGM, because we were discussing everything that was going to happen. And unfortunately, COVID has been with us since. So we saw in Q1 tourism arrivals fall by 23.6%, and that had a GDP impact of 1.7% on our Q1 alone. We closed our borders, and when we closed the borders, in response to being able to protect our citizens and ensure that we kept the virus at bay, we literally brought tourism to a halt. So it was the accommodations, the attractions, the craft markets, transportation providers, taxi, tour guides, everyone directly involved in tourism, but also it impacted all of the linkages. So we talked about manufacturing, Nevada mentioned agriculture, entertainment, the banks, everything is linked. And that's what we need to understand, that it's not only just the tourism industry itself, but it supports a lot of other industries. Even the legal fraternity, we do a lot of work in terms of contracts. And so you have a widespread impact that tourism really touches. So we ended up with massive layoffs with the hotels and attractions, everything closed down, no international arrivals. And so some of our companies try to pay our staff, try to keep them on staff and have salaries, even though no revenue was coming in. And some entities looked at paying between 35 to 50% of the base salaries, clearly recognizing that we had to support our team members. But with no revenue coming in, it's been very difficult. And you have to remember that when an entity closes, it's not that you don't have operating costs. You still have electricity, you still have security, you still have insurance. And as I said, we still had salaries, water, etc. So you are basically bleeding with no revenue coming in. And as Henry had mentioned, the predictions for 2020, UNWTO predicted a global tourism decline of between 50 to 70% for 2020. So right now, Jamaica was losing approximately $400 million per day. So it's quite stark, the challenges that we're facing. And particularly Jamaica also was very good in terms of establishing its linkages. So, there was an UNCTAD report that said that Jamaica would be the worst affected country out of all the tourism dependent nations. And, a lot of people question that. Why? And the reason is that we have been very successful in our linkages program. So, that's something we've been working on through the Ministry of Tourism, and we have expanded that program, not only to look at agriculture and manufacturing, but gastronomy, shopping, entertainment and sports, and just health and wellness, as well as knowledge. So those are the networks we have. And it's important to understand how much tourism really permeates the society.
Yes. And I think I the way that you have just kind of laid that foundation for us for the discussion on tourism, because sometimes we are not hypersensitive to the linkages that we have worked so assiduously on, that have in fact been case studies of success. The way that we're able to build our linkages industry in Jamaica. So, Nicola, what I want to switch to now is based on what you have set out for us. How are you seeing the different size hotels and guest houses, etc.? How are they managing through this time? Because we have large resorts that are parts of chains that will have a different response to a small bed and breakfast and Airbnb. How are we seeing the different areas of tourism in terms of accommodations affected?
Well, what has been happening is that, as I said, in the March period, March until June 15th, when our borders reopened, literally they all closed. So everyone was in the same position. And some persons, as I said, tried to retain staff or support staff as best as they could. We also had the care program through the government, which also assisted, recognizing that there would be no salaries or no income coming in. One of the things we have also been doing in that time is the implementation of the tourism protocols. So to garner that reopening and recovery effort in a safe way, we have worked with the Ministry of Tourism, that's the GHTA, the entire private sector, on implementing a very stringent set of protocols that have been implemented not only in terms of the attractions, the ground transportation, but really through the hotels, the villas, the guest houses. Every aspect has been focused on ensuring that we have, the PPEs, persons have new sanitation measures, social distancing, reconfiguring our restaurants, our bars, everything in the hotel, putting in a COVID, response team. So it's been quite a lot. And for the smaller players in particular, it has been challenging because they are usually, more a mom and pop operation. So in terms of staff and capacity to implement some of these things, or even financial ability to implement, has been very challenging. So when we reopen on the 15th of June, it's been a slow and staged reopening. So not every hotel has reopened, not every attraction, not every guest house, not every villa. Just a few persons have decided to reopen now. And one of the reasons is that we anticipated that, the number of stopover arrivals coming in would be very low compared to 2019 figures. So that way occupancies are going to be very low. So we knew that is going to be a slow burn and a very painful one, but you have to start the market somewhere. You have to put it out there. You have to engender. Our booking window when people travel is usually 3 to 6 months before they actually take the trip. They're looking, they're visioning, they're deciding. So if we don't start now, and then we have to build up. So right now, hotels and accommodation generally is running between a 10% to maybe a 35% occupancy, which is extremely low. Our break-even point for most hotels is 65%. So you can't just say we're just bleeding money. So it's going to be tough. But as I said, we had to start. We had to start the engine. It's an engine that needs a lot of effort. You have to start your marketing campaigns. You have to get back out there. We have to reassure the traveling public that we have safety and protocols in place. We have to ensure our staff are well protected. And so when they go back into their communities after leaving work, that the communities are also protected. So it's going through all the aspects. And that's why we're open in a limited way with the resilience corridors and just trying to ensure that we do it in the most safe way. So we have to live with COVID, but we have to live with it safely.
We have to live with it. And Nicola, you have mentioned that, it is tough going now. I mean, when you're looking at occupancy of 10 to 15% and break even is 65%, the accommodations, attractions, they're bleeding.
Yes, they are.
When we are having discussions that say things like, a vaccine may not be available for another 2 years. So we're going to be living with COVID on the one hand. We're looking in the US, which is a large part of our market, and we are seeing those numbers for COVID infections tracking higher and higher. Yes. We're seeing where our neighboring countries like the Bahamas has closed their borders. What outlook do you see for us for the next year to 2 years in getting this wheel turning?
Well, I think we have done a lot of things smartly, and we have really done a lot of consultation. We do still have the pre-testing requirement. We also have mandatory testing for business travelers. We continue to, as I said, adhere to the protocols in terms of the entire tourism industry. And we're very, strict on it. So I think there is demand for Jamaica. People want to travel to Jamaica. We're near shore to the US. So right now, Americans are banned from traveling nearly everywhere in the world, so they will be looking for the countries that will allow them to travel. And as you know, the US market is roughly 68% of our arrivals. Between US and Canada, North America makes up 80% of our tourism arrivals. So it's a very big market for us. So if we can manage our situation locally, and this means also our own citizens, those who return in home, those who live here, have to also manage the situation for their own protection as well, because we don't want to see rising numbers, whether it's local population or visitors, because again, that's going to provide an element of uncertainty to the potential business that we are getting. And as tourism plays such a vital role and is so deeply entwined into our economic survival, we all have to work together to kind of protect and ensure that it helps us in the recovery process. And tourism is the kind of industry, because of the linkages, it's like 41 cents out of every dollar that we retain, which is up 36% from 2016, according to the WTCC. So because of those deep linkages, we are also the industry that can give you the fastest recovery if we do it safely and in a structured and coordinated manner. So it's going to require private sector, it's going to require government, it's going to require the support of our financial institutions, it's going to require our own citizens, multilaterals. Everybody has to come together and look at what are the instruments that is required to ensure that we can do this and do it in a safe way. And as you said, at the end of the day, ensure that none of the assets in the industry end up closing and being shuttered for good, because we want to ensure that we have those assets available. So when that takeoff comes, we can jump right back in and get back to pre-COVID levels as fast as we can.
Okay. So Nicola, one of the things too that has come up on this program, we in fact had Kyle Mace a couple of weeks ago from Jamaica in, and some of the discussions that we had was there is a reality that some of our accommodations will not be able to survive.
That is a very strong possibility. As I said, if we don't get on that recovery path, if we don't see the occupancies coming up because of those break-even points that I discussed with you, but also if they don't get the financial support and leniency from their lenders. Some of the banks, we met very early with the Bankers Association, and they have been working with the various entities. Some persons had to take out loans in order to put in place the protocols, because as I said, there's no cash flow. We also were faced with a further cash flow complication, because how tourism works is that a lot of our business is paid for in advance before the customer arrives. But because we would have closed, let's say from March until June, and the uncertainty for the rest of the year, we have had severe cancellations. So all of that money that you banked early as deposits for a stay that is coming has to be refunded. So you've been sending back all of that money. Additionally, the next source of business is normally through tour operators and travel agents, and they have been affected worldwide. So they have also, some have said, look, we just can't pay you. So even though we had a great winter, January, February, and a portion of March, there are many hotels that have not seen a cent of that money as yet, because those contracts have 30, 60, or 90-day payments, and they have just basically said, sorry, we can't pay you. So it's a really difficult situation, and we've seen some grant funds that have become available. We have seen some preferred loan instruments, but we still do need a lot more thought and effort and creative solutions if we are going to ensure that the tourism entities survive. And and Jamaica has been one of those countries that have had not just big hotels, but we have been known for all our diversity in our tourism products: small attractions, large attractions, villas, guest houses, apartments, medium-sized hotels, EP hotels, all-inclusive hotels. And that's been the charm of Jamaica. So you really don't want to lose that dynamic, eclectic Jamaica that everybody loves. So it's really a serious situation we're in, and we're just trying to see how best we can work our way out of it.
Okay, and Nicola, thank you so much for really giving us some insight in the tourism industry, because I think sometimes we look at it just very surface level, not understanding when you get granular how deep it affects all of us. One of the things as we wrap up, I know that a lot of accommodations have been offering specials to Jamaicans for a staycation. So I know you would like to do a little plug for us to support our local business. We can't go anywhere anyway. So it's not staycation style.
Well, I mean, it's something that JHT and JTB has always focused on. That's local tourism. It's an integral part of our business model. And, you know, we used to do Experience Jamaica campaigns before. So we just launched relaunched the Rediscover Jamaica campaign. And that's, you know, offering Jamaicans to take a staycation, really get out there. There are tons of specials on hotels, all the accommodations, on attractions. So it's really a great time to enjoy your own country. I mean, as a Jamaican, I've been to every parish and stayed in every parish, and I always say this, no visitor should come to my island and stay or visit anywhere that I've never been. So even if it's a budget version of a staycation, you can still have one, and you should really look at all the options. A lot of hotels are offering good deals, and it's a time for us to support each other. You know, it's a time where, as Nevada said earlier, you know, with agriculture, we have to see how we can grow the onions and do the things that will bring and keep the money in Jamaica. So if we can, instead of, you know, looking to travel abroad all the time, which, you know, everybody loves doing that, but spend, you know, every year, if you have 2 trips you want to do, this is going forward, not just for right now, but you should build in that Jamaican experience. And it's a great thing for kids growing up, you know, to have that Jamaica experience and not always just say, oh, went abroad for trips. But you can still do that, but still enjoy a Jamaican staycation. Yeah. So yes, definitely encouraging everyone to get out there and, you know, enjoy the country, enjoy Jamaica, and utilize this time. You know, there are great deals, so take advantage of it.
Yes, thank you so much, Nicola. So Nicola is one of our seasoned tourism professionals. She's vice president of the Caribbean Hotel and Tourist Association, and she's also past president of the Jamaica Hotel and Tourism Association. Nicola, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I noted that you said earlier, let us enjoy Jamaica safely. Yes. The protocols, we spent a lot of time putting those protocols in place. We can enjoy our country and we can do it safely. Thanks so much, Nicola. Happy Independence. Wow, so we have had some great discussions. We spoke with Henry Mooney from the IDB, and we're also just joined by Nicola Madden-Greig, who gave us some good background understanding of what's happening in tourism. So now we're going to have some great discussion. We have Nevada back, and we are also going to be joined by the president of the private sector organization of Jamaica, our very own Keith Duncan. And Keith is going to take us through. So Keith has been doing, Keith, welcome.
Hi, thank you to the very popular program, COVIDCAST.
And Keith, you know,
and counting.
Yes, episode 20. So Jamaica celebrates 58 years of independence this week, and we celebrate 20 weeks of COVID. So we're still young, but we are doing our best to educate our business people. And Keith, you know, in our discussions, you have really been doing a lot of tracking with what's happening in our various sectors. I know one of the things you're saying is that there are some green shoots. Can you tell us what, in your tracking, what are you seeing happening in the economy?
Yes. Well, you know, what I'm really, you know, we had our COVID Economic Recovery Task Force, which was formed by the Prime Minister under the chairmanship of the Minister of Finance, Dr. Nigel Clark. And I think that gave us some focus. Now, the objective as laid out by Dr. Clark in summary, what he said was, the task force recommends not simply fixing what has been broken by COVID-19, but to also address the fundamental gaps that have been exposed by COVID-19 and to exploit the opportunities the crisis offers, right? So not only did we focus as a COVID Economic Recovery Task Force, and we all participated, Nevada and Rochelle, you guys participated as members of the Local Services Committee, you know what I mean? And the COVID Economic Recovery Task Force was focused around getting the economy back to pre-COVID levels within 2 years. You know, it took us about 10 years to get back from the global crisis of 2008, 2009, the financial crisis. we are saying that we would like to get our economy back to pre-COVID levels in the year 2022, 2023. So get back to GDP levels in 2 years. So we project to have a slowdown of economy of 5.3% in this current financial year, and to bounce to 3.9% next year growth in real GDP, and 2.2% in the following year. So we recover. However, we have to see our economy opening up. Now, that is, and therefore what we have seen is a phased opening up of the economy. So I believe the COVID Economic Recovery Task Force helped to focus the minds, and programs like COVIDCAST Jamaica, and the PSOJ, this PSOJ program driven by you guys, you extremely brilliant guys, right, has helped to focus people's minds, to train people, to educate people, to show them the way, to show them the possibilities that exist, to really pivot their businesses, how to survive in this environment, right? So in the same way the COVID Economic Recovery Task Force pulled together society and the government to really focus our minds on recovery. In the first instance, to recover, and in the second instance, to look at the underlying structural deficiencies we have had as an economy to really address them. Now, what I would say, no, we are seeing some positive signs right now. We're seeing the domestic economy picking up significantly. In my little survey of the banking sector and Nevada, we would have had a meeting with the Bank of Jamaica last week in where we presented to them because they wanted to have some kind of indication of what we're seeing in the economy. So I've been doing constant surveys to get a sense of what is going on. When I survey the commercial banks, in the last 2 months, they have seen loans recovering almost to pre-COVID levels. So there's a bounce back in loans on the commercial side and on the retail side. So therefore, there is activity. So people are now stepping up their borrowing, and it's getting towards pre-COVID levels, right? In manufacturing, we heard the president of the Manufacturers Association, Richard Pandui, speak to it in terms of manufacturing bouncing and almost at I think probably at greater levels than pre-COVID. Also in wholesale, retail, hardware, etc., we know that they are ahead of pre-COVID levels. Though there are significant changes, there are certain things that are driving this. Changes in people's spending patterns, consumption, the supply chain disruption, in that that creates opportunities, you know. So therefore, we're seeing a bounce in the domestic economy off of the lows of March, April, May, right? We see tax revenues actually exceeding the budgeted targets. We see tax revenues coming at $122 billion for April through June, ahead of target by $8 billion. There was a budget of $114 billion was a target. Still off last year's numbers, but still higher than projected. So if tax revenues are growing faster than budget, that's a positive sign. So therefore, you know, get it from the poultry industry, they're at 80% of pre-COVID levels, right? So therefore, what we're seeing is a bounce. However, we do have significant challenges because tourism is a significant part of the economy. And while we have opened up on June 15, our largest market in terms of the United States of America has severe challenges, right? They are the #1 COVID country in the world, right? So therefore, they have severe challenges, and they are our market. So we have been working through, our testing, our contact tracing. We have been working through the methodologies of how you manage COVID. We balance public health, right? And in Nevada's words, that creates a kind of a jugu, a possibility of a jugu recovery, right? So that is, recovery does not have to be linear and smooth. In Nevada's terms, jugu, right? But what we're seeing here is that, there has to be management of the virus, balancing public health with. So there's a risk-based approach. We took the risk. We opened our borders on June 15. You know what I mean? And we were doing the testing of visitors coming in. As at July 15, people have to pre-test before they come in, right? We have seen a backlog of people to be tested. and we're seeing that backlog went up to as high as 10,000, coming down to last number I heard was like 3,000, but we did clear it because, as Fauci said, you know, the Fauci from the US, he said that no, it was Bill Gates. Sorry, Bill Gates said that any test less than greater than 48 hours is really don't make a lot of sense, right?
Yeah.
So therefore, we have to get back our thing on track, and that's what we're working on. So the government will have to ensure that, you know, public education is up, that people remain disciplined, or we're risking it, and you might have to ramp up restrictions, or, you know, increase restrictions if you see that the thing may be getting a little bit out of control, and they might have to pull back. That is what you may have to do in terms of managing the risk. But the phased opening of the economy has had a positive impact on the sectors. Manufacturing, construction, global services continues to do well. You know what I mean? The business process outsourcing area. And that's another supply chain disruption, because when everybody was shutting down all over the world in the BPOs, we managed to keep BPOs home with challenges, and everybody get vexed and say, Lord God, them have a match up the country, right? We managed to keep BPOs open, put in the protocols, and the people have been really disciplined about it. Now what we're having is challenge when they're opening up the entertainment industry, we're opening up the beaches, and we're opening up these areas, and we hear Minister McKenzie making noise and say, I will shut you down, I will shut you down. You understand what I'm saying? So therefore, we're going to have to find a way to manage this opening up because what they're trying to do there is get that informal economy going, get economic going.
But safely.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's happening.
Yeah.
It's happening. We still need management.
Yeah. Keith, we're getting a lot of comments from the discussion that you're having, and I'm seeing a very interesting one here from Raimundo Fitzgeraldo. And he says, we're talking about stopping the immediate bleeding, and that is completely appropriate. And he's talking about tourism. But the difficult conversation that needs to be had is the diversification away from tourism, because it is overexposed to global economic shocks as well as internal social and economic disruptions. I'm not talking about eliminating the sector. I'm talking about reconfiguring the economy to reprioritize the sectors regarding their contributions to GDP. So Keith and Eva, I want to hear from both of you on this comment, because that is the kind of underlying conversation that people are like, well, we can't just keep depending on the tourism alone.
Right. So, Rochelle, a few weeks ago, we had a whole discussion about pivoting a business. In many situations, because of what's going on now, we also may need to think about pivoting an economy for exactly what Raimundo has outlined, right? And how do you start to think about that? And we don't know what necessarily that looks like. But for example, if we're able to keep our COVID numbers low, if we're able to develop private testing and become a place that is relatively easy to get tested, and remember, we have a lot of rooms available. What if we became a retirement area for North America, for older North Americans? So suddenly, all of that room infrastructure that we have, and Airbnb, we create a situation where, because remember, America's out of control vis-a-vis some of the things. We create a situation here now. You can get tested, you can be safe, you can be at the beach, we can create social distancing and so on. Why don't you come and stay with us? Suddenly, a market that we never had before. Everybody moved to Florida, right? Every old American moved to Florida. You said, don't worry about Florida. Come to Kingston, come to Montego Bay, come to Ocho Rios, right? So we're going to have to think very, very creatively about how to pivot an economy as part of our discussion.
Yeah. And, you know, that was one of the questions that were raised in the COVID Economic Recovery Task Force. And Nigel was pushing, the Minister of Finance was pushing us. What does tourism look like in the new normal? It's like, you know, what does that look like? Is it, you know, what's that configuration? Because maybe it's not the same old product. It's a build out. No, of course we're going to have to diversify. We're going to have to see diversification in the areas of business process outsourcing. You know what I mean? We have continued to do well. Manufacturing, because of supply chain disruption, we have seen increased demand from the Eastern Caribbean and maybe from CARICOM, and that's probably where we need to look to. We have seen increased demand out of Central America. We know about the Costa Rica, you know, ordering from us, orders coming in. There are opportunities out there. So we need to ramp up our export possibilities in the region. We need to work on our logistics area our logistics. We need to work on the manufacturing, which is part of the supply chain linkages, because I was at a free-form factory yesterday, and the possibilities there are endless, right? And there are many opportunities. I was in that whole manufacturing zone yesterday, and they are pumping. They are growing, and therefore we're gonna have to now configure ourselves. And I saw the minister in the Ministry of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture, and Finance speak to a 3% growth, and Richard Pandui said that's not enough, annual growth of 3%. So the opportunities are there. One of the areas that we're going to focus on, and even in our workshop that's coming up, seminar, is what the new economy. What are the areas that we need to work on in our new economy to ramp up productivity? Because Jamaica's productivity has been flat or declining, not flat, declining for the last 20 years. That's because we have been investing in our ICT infrastructure, right? We need to ramp that up. We need broadband, we need access. We need to work on our SME access. And there's a committee which Nevada sits on also, and I sit on, and Sheldon Cole from Innovation Connects, who is closely related to this effort, sit on, chaired by Minister Fayval Williams, with Lauren Peart from Blue Dot, and several other players, David Noel from Scotia, Nadine Matthews from NCB, and other players in the space, Joe Matalon, Michael Leachin. They're all on this committee. And where are these levers that are going to across our country? If you ramp up broadband connectivity and you ramp up penetration, internet penetration, because internet is a new roads. The internet is a new roads. If you ramp that up, and we're going to be looking at that model that's supposed to get broadband penetration, so that we can now have that connectivity that we need, the speed that we need, so we can get value added going with our BPOs and with our ICT industry. You understand? So there are tremendous amount of opportunities that are available. Agro industry, we have never done that one too, right? So we're working on that agro industry. How does the agro industry, what are the areas that have stopped us for years that are really easy wins? The PSOJ formed a committee, the agro industry committee, to focus on this. In the same way we formed the committee, the Digital Transformation and Innovation Committee, chaired by Chris Record and led by Jackie Sharp as VP, who sit on also, Jackie Sharp sits on the New Economy grouping also. And so therefore we're focused on the areas that can really, the underlying areas enable us to our economy to drive productivity and competitiveness of our economy. Those are the areas of focus. Water. The last time a dam was built in Jamaica was about 80 years ago. You understand what I'm saying? And irrigation, you know what I mean? And getting our farmers water in in Junction, St. Elizabeth, or, the basket, what do you call it? The basket, whatever you call it.
Yes.
That is where we need to, because we have farmers, we have small farmers, they're making a lot of money. But if they had really good supply of water, and so therefore, if we focus on these key areas, we are enabling our economy.
So guys, please join us in the conversation in terms of giving us your comments and so on. We want to make sure that we have a national conversation about this issue. How, listen, learn, share your ideas, any comments and stuff that you have. We're here now to begin this what we consider as a crucial national conversation. And as Henry Mooney said earlier on, nobody has been here before. So everybody's kind of like, we see what's coming, but we're also trying to figure out what is some of the best ways to move forward. Ask your questions, share ideas. Let's make sure we are expansive in the way we think about this topic, as it's crucial for us.
Yeah. And in fact, Keith, it was interesting too that you took the conversation outside of just the usual pillars, because one of the key things that the PSOJ and other business associations, JMEA and the JCC, has been very involved in is the national consensus on crime. Because if we also, so there's so many different pillars that we need to be, levers that we need to be pulling. And I see a note here from— I would
love to comment on that one. I would love to have an opportunity.
The national consensus on crime will be an essential pillar. The execution on this initiative will need to be focused and disciplined. And I know this one is particularly near and dear to you, so we couldn't leave tonight and not touch on this.
Well, yeah, man, I had it in my notes, but I got carried away. But it is a priority. It is a priority. For years, we have wanted to have this national consensus on crime, for all of Jamaica to speak from one voice. Government, opposition, stakeholders, all the stakeholders, civil society, you know what I mean? All stakeholders speaking from one voice. The youth, the women, the small businesses, everybody speaking from one voice. Jamaicans for Justice, everybody should be speaking from one voice, one plan. All of us on board in the same way we had the voice around the economic reform program. We can argue around the fringes, but the essence of that strategy is important. Now, also in terms of consistency of and continuity in plans, it comes up to election. Right now, we have agreed on areas that are in execution. The reform of the police force, right? That's under execution, but we have put timelines to it. We have also agreed that social transformation, a socioeconomic transformation is necessary, inner city transformation. That's a priority inside here. You understand what I'm saying? So therefore, when we put these programs, that there was Unite for Jamaica or Unite for Change Jamaica, one of those programs that were in place, and it was not continued, and then we have Live Good. What we need to do is ensure that we have continuity in these programs, administration over administration, so we don't have that disruption in our crime strategy programs. And crime strategy is not only about enforcement; it's about prevention. So it's a social transformation along with the reform in the JCF, which has been ongoing, and the investment in the JCF, capacity, technology, etc. It is also ensuring that all ministries, departments, and agencies are aligned and supportive of this effort in the very same way that when we had the economic reform program and the IMF and EPOC in place, that everybody was focused around achieving those targets. We're going to have an oversight body that's put in place called the Crime Monitoring and Oversight Committee that will be in place to monitor. That plan is laid out. It's in the public domain, so everybody can view it. I think we should. It's on the PSOJ. It's on the PSOJ website, and it should be there attached in social media. We need to get it out there. But it is a watershed day for Jamaica, a game-changing day for Jamaica. We all have to own it. In the same way we own our economic reform program, we as Jamaica have to own this crime plan, which is not just about enforcement and locking up criminals. You know what I mean? It is about social transformation as a key component of this plan, which is very important. And changing the way we police. And this has started for the last 2 years or so, because I have been working with the police on the ground, delivering care packages, because we agreed with the Commissioner of Police that we would support this community policing by supplying the care packages for the police to deliver, so they could build relationships, the JCF, build relationships in these communities, build the trust by being there for every 2 weeks for the last 12 weeks. They have been in 25 communities across Jamaica, and it has worked. They have built some solid relationships in the communities. The communities are on side with them, so the communities need to come on board and help to deal with the gangs, removing the gangs in these communities, so that we can invest in our people and get the best out of our people.
Yeah.
You know.
So Keith, I'm looking here at our chat, and I see here where Romeo Stewart says, wow, this is so interesting. I'm excited about this conference, because one of the things we've said for this particular conference is that the private sector is no longer just sitting in their boardrooms doing things on their own. The private sector is on the ground with our people and very inclusive PSOJ. So this particular conference.
No, we're talking to the farmers too. We have we're talking to the farmers, small farmer, big farmer, large farmer, all kind of farmers, right? We're talking to them because we want to.
I'll pray that last is in the crime plan, the crime discussion, because that's what I'm hearing a lot from the farmers now.
When you finish, you can put it in there, but it's not in there right now. But we have agreed. We have agreed that we can add stuff to it, and I would love for us to be able to put something in there around this. You know what I mean?
Yes,
I want to pay
yes.
kudos to Mr. Lloyd Diston, chairman of the working group and president of the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce, who went in November or October when we had that summit, and he was named as chair of that working group, along with Professor Anthony Harriet and Professor Anthony Clayton, along with Elizabeth Ward, to put in the work around framing that plan, that strategic plan, right? Which was really pulling together what is the existing efforts that are occurring and any new areas, especially focused around how do you get that social transformation going. And they did a lot of hard work. They engaged with over 50 organizations, consultations to ensure that everybody was on the same page, work with the government, and we had Fitz Jackson, the spokesperson on national security, and Dr. Horace Chang, National Security Minister, on that committee, and they worked together to frame that plan so that everybody could say, yes, this is where we are. And Lloyd went and he shot that with the working group to everyone and ensure that everyone, and Lloyd is a man, him go through and him have to make sure everything detailed. You understand him coming like Nevada? You understand what I'm saying? Him have to make sure that everything right and everything detailed. You understand? And he did the work, and we were able to engage the Prime Minister. We were all in the meetings with the leader opposition, the Prime Minister, and all the stakeholders, working it through point by point with them. It was like a 6-hour meeting with the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister gave up his time. The leader of opposition gave up their time. So we think it's a genuine effort, and we're getting behind it, and we want the whole of Jamaica behind it. And if we fall off a track, we drop off of the thing, we have to get us back on shape, get Wicked Power and get us back on track. So it's a real good opportunity for Jamaica. Can you imagine if we get this? If we get all the Jamaica, we get crime moving in the right direction, and we have people feeling safe again. What does that do for the investment environment and confidence?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and this is no longer about us just sitting back and saying this is the government to handle these matters and we just watch the government. This is about collaboration. This is community activists. This is private sector. This is small business, large multilateral government. This is all of us coming together, which is pretty much how our Crossing the Chasm Road to Recovery Economic our online conference is geared that it's not a group, just a small group of people that sit down together and come up with something and just keep it amongst themselves. This is an inclusive digital conference that we're seeing. If you're not on the list, please sign up. You can sign up at sme@psoj.org. It is important that you not just see the things happen to you. Be a part of the conversation, sit at the table, and we will only move Jamaica forward when we are all a part of the conversation and contributing to an outcome. So Keith, for our viewers, what are you encouraging our viewers to? Why are you encouraging our viewers to be a part? It's 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock. Why do they need to be at that digital?
When I look at the agenda, it is a stacked agenda full of value-added information, guidance, direction. You know what I mean? When we're going to have the Honorable Nigel Clark opening up, and he's going to be speaking to where does he see this economy going? What kind of recovery are we seeing? Is that V shape? Is the U shape? Is the W shape? And W is probably Nevada jugu equivalent of jugu. L shape, you know what I mean? Where do we see this? Where do we see this going? You know what I mean? Balance of payments, revenues, getting back on track, GDP growth. Are we on track? Dr. Clark will be speaking to that. I mean, they were able to, give us a fiscal stimulus package at the beginning of COVID care program, reduction in GCT to help stimulate the economy. Let's hear more of that. Let's hear more. We're going to hear from the governor, Richard Biles, in terms of him speaking about liquidity and forbearance. And I would say that the central bank governor has done a tremendous job, and the BOJ in terms of ensuring liquidity is in the market. And they have been touching everyone. They have been touching the credit unions and talking to the credit unions and ensuring that there is access. So therefore, we've been doing a decent job, I believe. And secondly, in terms of forbearance, where do we go with forbearance? Because no matter what, there are people that are still impacted, no matter how positive, as we call it.
Keith, hold on. What is forbearance, Keith? Remember our audience.
All right.
Forbearance mean?
Okay, all right. Forbearance means that when the central bank, the Bank of Jamaica gives our financial institutions the room to extend moratoriums,
Okay.
the room to extend, working capital support, and without it impacting their capital or their books. In other words, they don't have to make the loan a bad loan.
Okay.
So it gives the financial institution, the commercial banks, the credit unions, and everyone the opportunity to say, I can extend your payment period. I can, in other words, to give you the room to recover. So the Bank of Jamaica has given us that room, and we think that's constantly under surveillance, kind of thing from the Bank of Jamaica. The critical areas, impacted tourism, the impacted areas, those sectors that are impacted because they are downstream from tourism. How do they recover? Where do they need to pivot? What is their strategy? Because there are some that are going to have to find a way out, change their business model, or change their business focus in order to move forward. And that's been a topic of COVIDCAST in terms of how do you pivot? You know what I mean? And therefore, all the various areas and opportunities. And we're looking at the critical sectors, remittances. Everybody thought remittances would fall through the ground. They're actually up year over year by about 5%. You know what I mean? So, that's another positive thing for what's going on with the economy. And I think what is going on right there is that a lot of Jamaicans are sending money home to invest in their homes, to invest in their income, because they see Jamaica as that safe spot. Similar to what Nevada was saying in terms of Jamaica being that safe destination. If we invest and ramp up the capacity for testing, for this, for that, and the other, so people feel safe in this country, then that's the environment that we can create. And then we will get all our diaspora to come home and work hard and bring home their money and invest in Jamaica. You understand what I'm saying? Absolutely. So therefore, that's why we see one of the things of remittances, because people are sending money, people are fixing up their properties, fixing up their homes, fixing them homes so them can leave the madness of what is going on in North America and come to Jamaica.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Yeah. And and the new economy is very important. We discussed that earlier. So we'll have Minister Fable Williams there, and she will be, speaking to that overall thrust, because Jamaica is behind. We are behind the 8 ball. We need to catch up, right? And e-commerce, SME, you know what I mean? We know we've been working with the SME space, and we have been having some interesting discussions around how do you package, this e-commerce solutions for SMEs. You don't expect them to go buy cloud and then go buy this and then to go buy that, and they must put it together by themselves. So how do we put it all together? You know what I mean? So that it can make a thing. And the PSOJ team will be launching a smallbusinessportal.com, and I'm going to put Nevada on the spot for this one. Who is listening on the spot for this one for a timeline for when we launch, because I know Nevada is trying to make it perfect, but don't make perfect the enemy. All right, I'm telling you, because it's a brilliant product that's coming, that's going to educate our SMEs, right? All of these this wonderful content that has been developed through these 20 episodes of COVIDCAST. Imagine that packaged into those tutorials that you can view anytime. So you can think through at 1 o'clock in the morning when you're a little confused. But remember when Nevada and Rochelle did financial statement, and we never really understand the cash flow part. Let me go look back on it. You understand? And you just go to smallbusinessportal.com, you go look at it, and you say, I see. This is what I need to do so that the banks can see my cash flow, so that I can borrow money, so that they know that I have a live stream of cash because I'm running a good business.
Yes. One of the things that we, just to provide context, one of the things that we found as we're doing the PSOJ SME project, the information for SMEs is really scattered all over the place. So requiring the SME to sort of look here, look there, try and pull it together, there's holes of stuff that's missing. Now, there's a ton of different programs that have set up in terms of funding or training or technical support that actually is out there for SMEs. So what we decided to do at the PSOJ, working with our social media partner, Adtelligent, is that we said, let's consolidate all of this information to one place. So it's called smallbusinessportal.com. We have a draft thing there now, but we're going to have a proper launch in a couple of weeks, which basically then you don't need to think about where to go as a small business. This is the place that you're going to start. We're also going to invite anyone who is a provider of a service to small business to register their information on the site as well. So let it be the hub where people who serve small business and the small business who are looking for services
Small
and
and
looking
medium.
for training.
Don't forget medium in it. You think it's only small
Small and
business.
medium, yes. No, of course. So both small and medium. So it becomes sort of a place. So anybody who has something, who's coming up with something new, technology, this becomes a sensible place to put everything because we're consolidating it in one place. Yeah.
And looking across the financial sector for solutions, how do we compare this bank against this bank for solutions? Where can I get equity for my business? Do I go to a First Angels? Do I go here? We want to be able to capture the ecosystem so that we can be that place where people can get that information. You know what I mean? And then people can learn also, because our SMEs have to really make a point of educating themselves and bringing themselves up to global standards. We are here to support you, because the SMEs are what we're going to drive this economy, drive innovation. SMEs provide 70 to 80% of Jamaica's employment.
Yes.
If we get SMEs work, and 50 to 6% of GDP, if we get SMEs working for us, working for Jamaica and innovation, Jamaica is a long way. So, you know what I mean? So the government can create the framework. They can ensure that they invest in broadband, in water, in this, that, and the other. But we need to be innovative. Over the years, Jamaica has suffered from macroeconomic instability, FinSac, all of these various things that have thrown us out, and dollar moving all over the place, interest rates all over the place. We have macroeconomic stability. Even inside of COVID, we have macroeconomic stability. Exchange rate still a little, in Nevada's terms, juggle, but range. You understand what I'm saying? And and that the foreign exchange market will develop as we bring the foreign exchange trading platform, and we bring like more develop second order products like forward contracts, options, and foreign exchange. We deepen the market. But what I'm saying is that we are maturing and growing as a country. We have more transparency. We hear about corruption. It's because we have the Commission, and we have the FID, and we have MOCA. We have these entities in place that are to report. They need more resources. We have Great Christie back in town, and Great Christie, him and man don't play. So therefore, and he's called it for his resources, and he's going to ensure that we have that transparency and that people are held to account. So we're growing up as a country. People are growing up as a country. You understand? So let us manifest with greatness.
Manifest our greatness. So Keith, we really after that inspirational thing, it looked like, and certainly if we keep on this path, Jamaica can be in actually a much better place than we were before COVID, as long as we stay focused and integrate all of these various linkages. Nicola talked about that, right? And that we are expansive in the way that we're thinking, because this is actually an opportunity for us to move create a huge shift internally. Rochelle, what else?
Yeah, Keith just said a while ago, and I think we can wrap up on that point. We're growing up as a country. On Thursday, we'll be 58 years old. We're big people now, and we truly are growing up as a country. This year's festival song, Gojo Bantan, say, anywhere in the world I go, you know that I'm a Jamaican. We are strong, we are powerful, that we truly manifest greatness, and we will only be able to do that together. We have to come together, all aspects of society, private sector, public sector, the communities, educators, civil societies, the police, the soldiers. We all have to come together, and that's how we will truly grow up as a country and manifest the greatness that Jamaica is. So to our viewers, this is our Independence Week. Happy independence. We have come a long way, baby, and we still have our ways to go. We shall do it together stronger. Thank you very much, Keith Duncan, for joining us today. Nevada Pow, it's never the same without you. Nevada,
hello. I'm on the page to Nevada and Rochelle and the intelligent team and the support cast from PSOJ SME, Alexi, Justine, Anya, Mark, all the whole entire team that support this production. Richard Stewart around the back there, Richard, my champion, Stephanie, etc. No, this is a brilliant You know, I tell you guys I want to take this international, you know what I mean? But when holding me back, you know what I mean? But we have 2 million views. We have a lot to build on.
Yes,
we have a lot to build on, and I'd like us to acknowledge the efforts. Nevada, you have owned this SME space. Rochelle, you have owned it also as chief executive for the SME, PSOJ SME project, and Nevada as the project architect and mind and owner, Dr. SME. I really want to thank you both for putting this energy behind, because I want to make we look good as PSOJ.
And for your leadership, thank you. The guided leadership and the opportunity to actually make a difference in the country is quite fantastic.
Yeah, man.
And you know, it's always important. I see a Dominic Duncan reminding us that Keith is 58 as well. So Keith,
thank you, Dominic. You're busting, man.
Yes, so this is some very visionary leadership where we are seeing a Jamaica that we can be. So we're not just sitting down on the veranda with a glass of wine saying, boy, we could have done better, you know. We're actually getting in the trenches and we're working to make Jamaica better. Happy Independence, Jamaica. We are 58. So viewers, next week we're going to be back again, and we are going to be back again on Thursday next week. So next week, Thursday, we're here at 7:30 p.m. Next week, Friday, you would have signed up for the online digital conference, which runs from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. If you are not on the list, you're going to email us at sme@psoj.org. The public and private sector will be confronting the economic challenges of the pandemic. We are crossing the chasm, the road to recovery. So we will see you next week, Thursday, right here at 7:30. And then we're going to see you for the online digital conference next week, Friday morning at 9 a.m. Happy Independence. Everywhere we go, you can know, say, we are Jamaicans. We are strong, and we shall cross this chasm together. See you next week.